Hello there, people of the internet. Out here making gun videos again. If you like this sort of stuff, subscribe to the channel, because I do this stuff all the time and I'm trying to grow the channel. So, viewer request. If you guys have any requests, let me know in the comments below, and it might end up getting made into a video. Viewer request. He said he wanted to see my sketchiest firearms. I can't quite remember who it was, but I know I saw that in the comments somewhere. So I figured to myself, hey, that's a really good idea, because I have some that are really sketchy and that I'm probably never going to shoot. So let's go ahead and look at some of my sketchier firearms. We're gonna go ahead and start off with like some that are sketchy, but only in the sense that if you don't know what you're doing, then you're gonna blow them up. But if you do know what you're doing, then you're perfectly fine. So first things first, this is a Steyr 8890. This particular one I did a refurbishment on. I gotta oil the thing. This thing's been sitting in the back of my closet for a minute, and stock's dry, bluing. It definitely needs a good coat of oil on it. But anyway, these right here, they're a black powder design. They got like this flapper lock system on them. They're the rifle that predated the Steyr M95. They're chambered in 8x50, which is a smokeless powder round in a black powder design. And this design is just not really made to handle the pressures of that cartridge. If you load those cartridges in black powder, or you undercharge them to like 30-40 Krag specs, then these rifles will be able to handle it no problem. But if you go out and load some 8x50 for like a Steyr M95 versus this rifle here, then you do risk some complications potentially. I wanted to include this one because if somebody doesn't know what they're doing, then this rifle could definitely turn dangerous. As a matter of fact, my next gun, why did I put these all the way over there? This kind of falls into the same category of sketchy, but if you know what you're doing, it's fine. This is a Vetterli rifle. Particularly, this one is chambered in 6.5 CARANO. Now, these guns were done up by Italy. The Vetterli system is a black powder design. They were done up by Italy as a just-in-case rifle, or a give-out-as-war aid rifle, or a non-primary rifle that they could give to people who weren't necessarily going to be fighting on front lines, or who were deemed less essential than the people who were going to be getting CARANO rifles. So, these are chambered in 6.5 CARANO, and for the most part, you can shoot these pretty safely if you use an undercharged 6.5 CARANO charging. Typically, you would want to undercharge your CARANO round by like 50%, and once you start doing things like that, you start getting into like squib load territory. A lot of people will tell you that because the barrel shank, is that the word I'm looking for? Barrel sleeve, that's the word I'm looking for. The barrel sleeve that was inserted into these guns to bring them from their original 10.5mm bullet barrel bore down to a 6.5 diameter bore. They say that those are soldered in. Whether or not that's true, I have no idea, but I do know that these are stair-stepped into the barrel, so they're not going to come loose upon firing, because whenever you fire, your pressure and bullets and all the forces operate in that direction, and that's where the stair-stepping is. So you shouldn't have any issues with your barrel shank. If you do, that means the rifle probably took some kind of impact at some point in its life in this direction, which is entirely possible because a lot of these guns have seen some very difficult tasks. So the barrel shank, or the barrel sleeve, I keep saying shank, I'm sorry about that. The barrel sleeve shouldn't give you much problems. Where these rifles do run into problems is the locking lug system on these. It is a separate piece from the bolt itself, and as a result, it's just weaker. It's a weaker design. For black powder, that doesn't really matter, but you go bumping it up to smokeless powder, and then you start having issues, and these rifles right here are known to have significant issues in their 6.5 CARANO chambering. If you want to go and load black powder 6.5 CARANO, you can do that. Then you shouldn't have any problems with this system. So another one of my sketchy guns. If you know what you're doing, they're fine. If you don't know what you're doing, then you might have some problems. Alright, this would not be a sketchy gun video if I did not have Old Sketchy on the gun video. So Old Sketchy is a 1916 pattern Oviedo Mauser that I got years ago on the channel. Like, you can go watch old footage of old Sketchy from way, way back in the day. Now, the reality is that the rifle itself really isn't sketchy at all, but there's a couple of stipulations. This one right here, in its current configuration, is 7mm Mauser, but I have like a barreled receiver that I swap out in old Sketchy to change it from 7mm Mauser to 7.62. So whenever I do that, the 7.62 variants, those are the ones that tend to have some sketchiness behind them. There was some testing done that showed that these rifles could withstand somewhere of like 92,000 PSI or something like that. So a lot of people will tell you that firing 308 from a 7.62 Oviedo chambered rifle is going to be fine. Well, I fired probably about 1,000, maybe 1,500 rounds of 308, like full power, full pressure hunting 308 through my Oviedo Mauser a bunch of years ago, and the headspace was walking because the pressure was too high. So although it can handle it, it can't handle a tremendous amount of it because the headspace did walk, the pressure was high, and actually blew up the receiver on that particular rifle. So lessons learned, if you use 7.62 NATO as opposed to 308, the headspace does not seem to walk, because I have somewhere over in this pile another Oviedo Mauser somewhere. I have another Oviedo Mauser somewhere in that pile where I have just stuck thousands and thousands of rounds of 7.62 NATO through and have had no problem whatsoever. Like 150 grain M80 ball 7.62 NATO. So those rifles can handle that, but 308 might cause it to walk. But the main reason why I have old Sketchy here, and I call her old Sketchy, is because whenever I close the bolt has a lot of like play and movement in it, and whenever I show people that, they freak out. They're like, "Oh my god, I'm not shooting that thing!" And I'm like, "It's alright, once you actually put in the cartridge, it tightens up quite a bit." But it's just fun to move this thing and jiggle this thing and make all this noise. And I'm like, "Yeah, it's old Sketchy, the bolt barely closes." And it freaks people out. And then I show them, where is it at? Somewhere on this gun is, yeah, there she is. There's this big crack on the side of the stock that's been like very poorly glued on purpose just to make it look as sketchy as possible. The reality is that's not going to hurt anything. But old Sketchy is made to look sketchy. It's made to make people uncomfortable and freak out. It's not actually sketchy to shoot as long as you know what you're doing with the gun. But I wanted to go ahead and throw this on our list. Now, this is a gun that is legitimately sketchy to shoot. Basically any of your Saturday night specials. So Saturday night special was like a media-driven term in an effort to stop the importation of very cheap handguns. These guns are made of an alloy material, I think it's called Zamak or something like that, however that's pronounced. Z-A-M-A-K, if memory serves me correctly. There's a bunch of different companies that made them, but they all basically work exactly the same. They all disassemble the same. They all have the same fundamental mechanisms with them. But because of how they're made and the very cheap cast alloy stuff that they have going on, I have seen these guns fall apart like multiple times upon firing, and a lot of that is just because these guns aren't designed to withstand a large volume of fire. If you have like lower pressured cartridges like 32 ACP, 25 ACP, 22 long rifle, those guns of this design typically don't have much issue, but once you start bumping up into like 380 and 9mm, which is what I got right here, this particular one is a 380, that's where you start seeing these things break. In particular, up here at the very front of the slide, that piece will break off and then the slide will fly back into the shooter's phase, which is the exact opposite of what you want to happen in a gun. So every time I actually take one of these out and fire it, I just expect to get a slide in my face and to break a couple of teeth, which is, again, not what we want. So I don't shoot these very often. I'll shoot the lower pressured ones. Like I got some 25 ACP ones that I shoot. I'd have no problem shooting a 32 ACP. But once we start getting into the ones that I've personally seen break, that's where we start getting to the point where I'm like, all right, well, I might send a magazine through that for some video footage, and then that is it. But there we go. That's one of my sketchy guns. I've got several Lorsons, and this right here is Bryco, B-R-Y-C-O. And then there's Jennings, and just insert your choice of Saturday Night Special company here. They all make basically the same kind of gun. Alright, what do I want to grab next? Let's do this one! This, I'm sure you guys have seen before on the channel if you've been sticking around for any real time. This is a Hakeem that I got from Royal Tiger Imports. Whenever I got it, I knew it was going to be in rough shape. I bought it as a C grade. I got it for very cheap, considering what these rifles normally go for. I'm just glad that the stock on it is shoulderable. There are some of these coming from RTI where the stock itself is just full on broken off. So all things considered, I've already shown this off a bunch of times. It was locked up. I went ahead and I unlocked it. I cleaned it up well enough to kind of like figure out what's going on the inside. If I were to stick a round in this chamber and pull the trigger, I am fairly certain that it would go bang. The firing pin seems to be functional. The fire control group seems to be functional. Everything in this seems to be relatively functional. But it is so rusted and worn out that the flapper lock mechanism inside of this thing is like almost rounded. Like it's supposed to have enough of an edge on it to catch inside the receiver, but it's, like I said, basically rounded, and I do not have confidence in this thing holding itself closed under the firing of 8mm Mauser. If I were to load around in this and pull the trigger, I'm convinced it would go bang. Now, I could go through and replace some parts and do some repairs and maybe get this thing up and going, but the damn thing's basically a smoothbore, so I don't know why I would bother with that. The actual slide, which is supposed to catch on the bolt, does not catch on the bolt because the part of the bolt where the slide's supposed to catch has been completely rusted off. And so as a result, if I decide to open this thing, I need to grab myself a screwdriver. This is how I have to cock this gun. And then I can push the actual bolt back, and I can grab a round of 8mm Mauser, and then push it forward and let it close. And that right there should be enough to shove one in the chamber. And I don't foresee me ever trying to shoot this thing just because of the destroyed nature of it. But yeah, that right there is a sketchy gun. Okay, here's another sketchy one that I'm definitely never going to shoot. This is a Kyber Pass, I think #1 Mark III, clearly handmade Lee Enfield. It might be based off of a Lee Metford because there's no charger bridge, but I think there's no charger bridge because the bloody thing's a single shot rifle. So this should be chambered in .303 British. The bolt on this is clearly handmade. The cocking piece is clearly handmade with like a file. This side of the cocking piece, the little ridges that add texture are like in a straight line, pretty good. But then this side, those are very much not straight at all. Those look like they were carved in by someone who had too much to drink the night before. The head of this bolt and the extractor look like they were done on a milling and lathe machine in some dude's garage, because that is definitely not how the British would do it. The barrel itself, I've seen pictures and footage from Kyber Pass where they were using barrel blanks that were literally pieces of rebar. And this, you can tell from the thickness of the barrel. Let's see if I can turn this thing away to where you guys can see that. You can tell from the thickness of the barrel that this is not actually a #1 Mark III or a real .303 British barrel. So I don't know what the proofing on this barrel is. I don't know how hard the steel is. I do know that our front sight was actually milled from the same piece of barrel. It is like the same piece of metal, and what is supposed to be dovetailed right here, like the front sight blade is supposed to be dovetailed in, it's not dovetailed. Like they just kind of cut out the front sight to make it look like a front sight. On top of that, our rear sight, we have a rear sight that is kind of reminiscent of what you would find like back in the black powder days, but it's not quite Martini Henry or Lee Metford looking. It's kind of like its own beast. So this rear sight, we got a couple of we got a couple of graduations on it. It goes out to I'm gonna assume 500 yards, maybe 500 meters. But that 500 meter mark is all the way at the top of this thing. And if you were shooting 303 British at 500 meters, according to this, you'd be like mortaring this thing in at about this angle. And that's not that's not right. That's not right. The receiver on this, again, clearly handmade. The design of the actual receiver band that our buttstock like screws into is not correct at all. Like this is not supposed to look like this. If you notice there, it's just not right. The receiver itself, the contour on it, again, is not quite there. The actual, what would you call this? The rail of the receiver where the bolt slides through it. This is clearly done by like a file or something, because that is not even at all. I'm surprised that this bolt works as well as it does in this thing. And then our little bolt release right here, the way that these right here work, they're like spring tensioned or supposed to be held in there. This one's just held in by the actual wood itself. It's like a separate little piece. It catches, like under here, it catches into the actual wood versus being fastened to the receiver. Bright side though, it does actually work. The trigger on it really sucks, but it does actually work. I don't like how the bolt moves and like partially opens upon firing, but I do like the enthusiasm of the guy that actually made the rifle. So, single shot Kyber Pass lean field, clearly handmade. I don't think that I'm ever going to shoot this one. I might load up some black powder 303 British and like fire it from a string, but besides that, yeah, I don't foresee me really shooting this thing. The rifling inside of this barrel is clearly done by someone who knew that barrels were supposed to have rifling but had no idea what they actually did, because it is so uneven as it goes through the entire barrel. It's clearly done by someone who tried doing rifling and failed at it but decided it was good enough. And we have this one on the market now. Okay, next sketchy firearm. I don't want this video to go on too long. How long is it going? Oh god, it's already been freaking almost 20 minutes now. Next sketchy firearm. This one's less sketchy in the guise of blowing up, and more sketchy in the guise of you won't get many rounds through these because they break very easy. So this is a GSG MP40 in 22 long rifle. It's not just the MP40s. Basically any GSG 22 long rifle gun will have this issue. So the metal that these are made of is extraordinarily soft, and they do that to keep the price down. It's just like a poor quality metal, and that's fine for 22 long rifle. The issue is that the way that this is designed, and other GSG rifles as well, that soft metal wears very fast, and as a result you get issues with like stripped threads, or you get issues with parts wearing to the point to where there's too much wiggle room. Things become unreliable. I stuck probably about 1,000 rounds of 22 long rifle through this thing, which is absolutely nothing for a 22 long rifle. And the soft metal of one of the threads of the internal pieces like actually came completely undone and completely fell apart. And I just haven't gotten around to fixing it. I'm actually going to like weld that piece together and keep it like permanently encased inside of itself. And that should get this little 22 long rifle back up and going. But yeah, these GSG 22 long rifles, I've seen several of them wear out pretty gosh darn quickly. And it's just, if you're getting it to having MP40 because it's cool, fantastic, go for it. Just bear in mind that they're not made to be shot a bunch. Okay, now speaking of guns not made to be shot a bunch, this is not a sketchy gun, because I don't have this particular sketchy gun, but I'm still going to talk about it. So this right here is a Romanian RH10. This is an AK, and this is actually quite a good one. This is not the AK that I'm talking about. I have an Interordnance AK that I've had on the channel for a whole bunch of years. And back around 2,500 rounds, like, that AK decided to start failing, and those particular AKs are notorious for failing at that round count just because the bolts and the pins and the rivets and all of that stuff, they were like a softer metal than they were supposed to be. And the Inner Ordnance AKs had issues with head spacing. You had walking barrels and whatnot just because they had cast trunnions. Just got interrupting. I can't quite remember where I was. I know I was talking about the Inner Ordnance AK. But I got that Inner Ordnance AK, and it definitely is sketchy. You gotta like consistently watch the headspace to make sure it's not walking. This particular Inner Ordnance AK, I went ahead and I gutted the old stuffing. I threw in like donor stuff from a Romanian parts kit, so I had like good internals for the AK. For the Inner Ordnance AK, the actual, can I show this on camera? I don't think I could show me disassembling guns on camera, so I'm gonna do this off camera here. Pull the recoil spring out, and let me pull this bolt carrier out of here. So the bolt itself on the Inner Ordnance AK actually like fractured and broke, and the firing pin kept coming out of it as a result. Now the bolt carrier group, the piston on the Inner Ordnance AK really wasn't that bad, but our little tang back here was like really beginning to mushroom. And at 2,500 rounds, that should not be mushrooming. Maybe at 10,000 rounds, but we're talking like full-on flat levels of mushrooming. It was really bad, and they knew about it because there was like a rubber buffer inside the AK to try and prevent that. We were having the same issues with our hammer in the Inner Ordnance AKs. Just because the metal was so soft, it was also mushrooming and deforming. So the hammer and the bolt carrier group, I left those the same because they were good enough to continue to run, but eventually I'm going to have to swap those out. So our barrel right here, we got this pin sitting right here. Those are what actually like sort of holds our barrel front trunnion mixture in. There's more that goes into it than that, but just to keep things nice and simple, that pin right there is not supposed to move, but on the Inner Ordnance AK, you could like take a hammer and a pin and tap that out, when in reality you would need like a 12-ton press to be able to do that. So that's not good. That just shows that things are not to a proper spec, and that leads to walking headspace. So whenever those pins deform, the barrel slowly walks its way this way out of the receiver, and the chamber opens up more and more and more as you shoot, and eventually it gets to the point where the headspace, like the chamber's too large for 7.62 by 39, and you get yourself ruptured cartridges as a result, and that can lead to some pretty sketchy and dangerous things. So I don't have my Inner Ordnance AK with me, that's why I'm kind of showing this thing off instead, but I do have some footage of me fiddling around with it. The Inner Ordnance AK, I went ahead and I like spray painted it gold because I always wanted a gold AK, but I never wanted to deface like a real good one, so that's why I did that to the Inner Ordnance one. Okay, well, I think out of everything in my collection, those are probably my sketchier guns. So thanks for watching, appreciate your time, like, subscribe, share. Hopefully you guys had fun with this. I guess I will show off this one. This is a number 5 Jungle Carbine lookalike. This particular one was done by Santa Fe over in California. I think these were done in like the 1970s or something like that. But it's a number 1 Mark III that was cut down and made to look like a Jungle Carbine. And these are actually really good rifles. But I have seen, like personally, on these rifles, the flash hider here, like blow itself into pieces. And that's because these are just a cast metal. I don't know what metal it is, but if you look at it, you can see that it looks like cast iron. Like that's really what it looks like. Like under the paint and whatnot that's chipping off, you can see the actual porous casting material. I'm sure it's like a tool steel or something like that. But I have seen these come apart. And being subjected to the forces of muzzle blast from these rifles over and over and over and over, it's going to eventually come apart. So, yeah, I'm just kind of biding my time with that one. Okay, well, that's more like an honorable mention than anything else. So, thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. I think I already did the outro. I'm just going to see you guys on the next video. I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. The poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.